You've probably seen this on a map of Florida. The bottom of the state looks packed with people, while the whole northern half looks strangely empty. On a nighttime satellite image, South Florida is a solid strip of light from Miami to West Palm Beach. Then the lights thin out, Orlando pops up in the middle, Jacksonville glows up north, and beyond that, it is mostly dark. But Florida is one of the fastest growing states in the United States, so why did almost all that growth pile into the south while the north missed out? And what does that mean for jobs, politics, and daily life in the state? In this video, we will break down the real reasons, how timing, tourism, infrastructure, air conditioning, hurricanes, and migration patterns quietly created a crowded south and a left-behind north. By the end, you will see Florida as two very different regions that followed completely different paths, and you will be able to look at any population map of the state and instantly understand why it is so lopsided. Before we go on, subscribe for more deep dive geography videos like this one. A Tale of Two Climates. Before we talk about people, we need to talk about land, because Florida is not one environment. It is several, stacked on top of each other from north to south like layers of a cake. Northern Florida is, in many ways, more like Georgia or Alabama than like the Florida of popular imagination. The landscape is rolling hills covered in pine forests and live oaks draped with Spanish moss. The winters are mild by northern standards, but they are real winters. Freezing temperatures arrive every year. Snow, while rare, is not unheard of. Jacksonville, the largest city in northern Florida, has an average January low of around 42 degrees Fahrenheit. That is warmer than Boston, certainly, but it is not the endless summer that people imagine when they think of Florida. Drive south for a few hours, and the world begins to change. The pine forests give way to palm trees. The air grows heavier, more tropical. By the time you reach Miami, you have entered a different climate entirely. Miami's average January low is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost is almost unheard of. The city sits at the edge of the tropics, closer to Havana than to Jacksonville. The water is warmer, the beaches are wider, the landscape feels exotic in a way that northern Florida simply does not. This difference matters more than you might think, because when people imagine Florida, when they dream of escaping cold northern winters or retiring to a place of endless sunshine, they are imagining South Florida. They are imagining Miami Beach and Fort Lauderdale and the turquoise waters of the Keys. They are not imagining Jacksonville, a perfectly pleasant city that happens to have weather not so different from Savannah or Charleston. The climate gradient running from north to south created two Floridas long before any human being drew a border. One Florida is subtropical, warm year-round, and feels like an escape from the rest of America. The other Florida is simply the deep south with better beaches. And when the Great Migration to the Sunshine State began, that distinction would prove decisive. The swamp and the railroad. The story of Florida's population is really a story of timing. For most of American history, Florida was not a desirable place to live. It was a swamp. The entire southern half of the state was dominated by the Everglades, a vast river of grass that made large-scale settlement nearly impossible. Mosquitoes carried malaria and yellow fever. The heat was oppressive. There were no roads, no railroads, no infrastructure. Northern Florida, by contrast, was more accessible. It had higher ground, fewer swamps, and connections to the rest of the American South. For centuries, the population of Florida was concentrated in the north. Jacksonville was founded in 1822 and quickly became the state's largest city. Tallahassee became the capital. St. Augustine, the oldest European settlement in the continental United States, sat on the northeastern coast. Northern Florida was Florida. But then, something changed. In the late 1800s, a man named Henry Flagler looked at the swampy, mosquito-infested wilderness of South Florida and saw something no one else could see. He saw paradise. Flagler was a Standard Oil tycoon, one of the richest men in America, and he decided to build a railroad down the entire east coast of Florida, from Jacksonville all the way to Key West. It was an engineering marvel and an act of sheer audacity. Where there were no towns, Flagler built them. Where there were no hotels, he constructed palaces. He drained swamps. He laid track through impossible terrain, and he marketed his creation relentlessly. The Florida East Coast Railway opened South Florida to the world. Flagler built the Royal Poinciana Hotel in Palm Beach, then the largest hotel in the world. He built the Breakers. He extended his railroad to a tiny settlement called Miami in 1896 and watched it transform almost overnight from a village into a city. Flagler did not just build infrastructure, he built a brand. He invented the idea of South Florida as a tropical paradise, a playground for the wealthy, an escape from the gray winters of the Northeast. And that idea proved more powerful than any railroad. Northern Florida had been settled first. It had the head start, but it never had a Henry Flagler. It never had someone who looked at the land and imagined something grander than what was already there. The North developed slowly, organically, like any other part of the American South. The South was conjured into existence by vision and capital and marketing genius. By the early 1900s, the pattern was set. South Florida was where the glamour was. South Florida was where the money was. South Florida was Florida. Air conditioning and the jet age. If the railroad opened South Florida to settlement, what came next opened it to the world. In the decades after World War II, two technologies transformed American life: air conditioning and commercial aviation. Both changed Florida forever, but they changed the South far more than the North. Air conditioning made the subtropical climate of South Florida bearable year-round. Before widespread air conditioning, Miami summers were brutal. The heat and humidity drove even the most determined residents to seek relief. Hotels closed for the summer, business slowed to a crawl, but air conditioning changed everything. Suddenly, you could live in Miami in August. You could work in an office, you could shop in comfort, you could exist in a climate that would have been unbearable to your grandparents. At the same time, commercial aviation was shrinking the distance between South Florida and the rest of the world. Miami International Airport became a gateway, not just to the rest of America, but to Latin America, the Caribbean, and eventually the entire globe. Tourists who once had to endure long train rides could now fly to Miami in a few hours. International visitors could arrive directly. The world was suddenly much closer. Northern Florida had airports too. Jacksonville International Airport served the region adequately, but it never became a global hub. It never attracted the international routes that poured into Miami. The North remained connected primarily to the American South. The South became connected to the world, and the world wanted to come to South Florida, the gateway to the Americas. In 1959, Fidel Castro's revolution transformed Cuba and, in the process, transformed Miami. Over the following decades, hundreds of thousands of Cuban exiles fled to South Florida. They brought with them not just their families, but their culture, their entrepreneurial energy, and their determination to rebuild their lives. Miami became the capital of Cuban America. This was just the beginning. As political and economic turmoil swept through Latin America and the Caribbean, wave after wave of immigrants followed the Cubans to South Florida. Haitians fleeing dictatorship, Nicaraguans escaping civil war, Colombians and Venezuelans and Brazilians seeking opportunity. By the late 20th century, Miami had become one of the most international cities in America. The numbers are staggering. In 2024 alone, Miami-Dade County received over 123,000 net international migrants, the highest figure of any county in the entire nation. Year after year, South Florida absorbs more international immigration than almost anywhere else in America. Northern Florida never experienced anything comparable. Jacksonville grew primarily through domestic migration, Americans moving from other parts of the country. It remained an American city in the traditional sense, predominantly English-speaking, culturally aligned with the rest of the South. South Florida became something else entirely. It became a meeting point of cultures, a bridge between North America and Latin America, a place where Spanish is heard as often as English on the streets. This diversity proved to be an economic engine. International businesses opened offices in Miami to access Latin American markets. Banks established regional headquarters. Trade flowed through the ports. The diversity that some might have seen as a complication became South Florida's greatest competitive advantage. The retirement machine. When Americans think about retiring, many of them think about Florida, but more specifically, they think about South Florida. Florida has no state income tax. For retirees living on fixed incomes, on pensions and Social Security and investment accounts, this is an enormous draw. A retiree moving from New York or California or New Jersey can save tens of thousands of dollars every year simply by changing their address. But the tax advantage applies equally to the entire state. Northern Florida has no income tax either. Jacksonville offers the same tax benefits as Miami. So why do retirees overwhelmingly choose the South? The answer is perception and infrastructure. South Florida built an entire ecosystem designed to attract and serve retirees. Retirement communities proliferated across the region. Sarasota, Naples, Boca Raton, and the countless planned developments stretching across Palm Beach and Broward counties created self-contained worlds for older Americans. These are not just housing developments, they are complete lifestyle packages. Golf courses, tennis courts, clubhouses, pools, social activities, healthcare facilities, all designed specifically for people over 55. Florida has over 670 active adult communities, far more than any other state, and the vast majority of them are concentrated in South Florida. In Palm Beach County, over 31% of the population is over 60 years old. Nearly 1 million seniors are expected to live in South Florida by 2025. This concentration creates its own gravity. Doctors specialize in geriatric care. Restaurants offer early bird specials. Social networks form among people at similar life stages. Once a critical mass of retirees settles in an area, more retirees follow. Northern Florida never developed this infrastructure at the same scale. The region has retirement communities, certainly, but nothing approaching the density of the South. A retiree considering Florida faces a choice: move to a place specifically designed for people like them, surrounded by peers and services and amenities, or move to a region that is simply a nice place to live. Most choose the path of least resistance. Most choose the South. The power of perception. There is another factor in the great divide between North and South Florida, and it is perhaps the hardest to quantify. It is the power of image. When Americans think of Florida, what do they see? They see Miami Beach, they see palm trees swaying against a turquoise ocean, they see Art Deco hotels and celebrities and nightclubs and luxury yachts. They see a television Florida, a movie Florida, a music video Florida that has been burned into the national consciousness for decades. Miami Vice aired for 5 seasons in the 1980s and turned Miami into a symbol of glamour and danger. The Golden Girls made South Florida synonymous with retirement. Will Smith made Miami a song. Gloria Estefan made it a sound. The Real Housewives made it a spectacle. This cultural saturation has consequences. When a young professional in Chicago or New York dreams of moving somewhere warm, somewhere exciting, somewhere that feels like an upgrade, they think of Miami. They do not think of Jacksonville. Jacksonville is Florida's largest city by land area and one of its most economically dynamic. In 2024, it was ranked the second hottest job market in America. It has beautiful beaches, affordable housing, a growing technology sector, and a quality of life that rivals anywhere in the state. But it has no brand. It has no mythology. It exists in the shadow of a city 400 miles to the south that has spent a century building an image that Jacksonville has never tried to match. Perception shapes migration. People move not just to places, but to ideas of places, and the idea of Florida has always been South Florida. The rest of the state is simply where you drive through on the way to the dream. The momentum machine. Population growth is self-reinforcing. Success breeds success. And nowhere is this more evident than in the widening gap between North and South Florida. When people move to South Florida, businesses follow. When businesses open, they create jobs. When jobs appear, more people move to fill them. This virtuous cycle has been spinning in South Florida for decades, accelerating with each turn. In 2024 alone, Florida added over 467,000 new residents, second only to Texas in absolute growth. But this growth was not evenly distributed. Miami-Dade County grew by 2.3%. Broward County grew by 1.7%. Palm Beach County grew by 1.6%. Northern Florida grew too, but more slowly, unable to match the momentum of the South. Real estate development follows the same pattern. South Florida is experiencing a construction boom of historic proportions. West Palm Beach alone has dozens of new luxury developments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Cranes dot the skyline, condominiums rise along the intracoastal waterway. International investors pour capital into projects that would never find financing in northern Florida. This development creates more jobs, which attract more people, which justify more development. The cycle continues, and with each rotation, the gap between North and South grows wider. A tale of two cities. To understand the two Floridas, consider two representative cities. Jacksonville is a city of over 1 million people in its metropolitan area. It has one of the busiest ports in America, a growing financial services sector, and a cost of living far below the national average. The median home price is around $302,000, less than half of Miami's median of nearly $576,000. Jacksonville offers space, affordability, and a quality of life that many Americans would envy. But Jacksonville is invisible in the national imagination. It is not a destination, it is not a brand, it is simply a city, doing what cities do without the mythology that drives migration. Miami is the opposite. It is expensive, congested, and increasingly unaffordable for working families. Traffic is legendary. Housing costs have soared beyond the reach of many longtime residents. By almost any objective measure, quality of life in Miami is declining as prices rise and infrastructure strains under the weight of growth. And yet people keep coming. They keep coming because Miami is not just a city. It is an idea. It is an aspiration. It is the place you move when you want your life to feel bigger, more glamorous, more connected to the wider world. Jacksonville offers value. Miami offers status. And in the great migration decisions that shape American geography, status wins. What could have been? Northern Florida could catch up. It has the land, the coastline, the sunshine, and increasingly the economic opportunity. But it would require something that no one has yet attempted on a large scale. It would require a Henry Flagler moment, a reimagining of what Northern Florida could be. The region would need to build the luxury resort infrastructure that attracts international tourists. It would need to market itself not as the affordable alternative to South Florida, but as a destination in its own right. It would need to attract the international migrants who have transformed Miami into a global city. It would need to develop the retirement communities and lifestyle amenities that draw wealthy seniors from the Northeast and California. All of this is possible. None of it is happening. Instead, the gap continues to widen. South Florida absorbs the growth, the investment, the international attention, and the cultural cachet. Northern Florida remains what it has always been, a pleasant region, undervalued and overlooked, waiting for someone to see what it could become. Two Floridas, one future. Stand anywhere in Northern Florida and look around. You will see pine forests and quiet beaches and small towns that feel untouched by the frenzy of modern life. It is a landscape of possibility, of space, of roads that lead somewhere peaceful and slow. Now stand on Ocean Drive in South Beach at night. Neon lights pulse against Art Deco facades. Music spills from every doorway. Tourists from a dozen countries crowd the sidewalks. The air smells of salt and perfume and possibility. This is the Florida that the world imagines. This is the Florida that drew millions of people from across America and across the globe. Two different worlds shaped by the same forces that shape all human settlement: geography, timing, infrastructure, and the power of a dream. Northern Florida had the head start. It was settled first, developed first, and for decades was the real Florida. But it never captured the imagination. It never became a brand. It never convinced the world that it was worth the journey. South Florida had something more powerful than a head start. It had a vision. It had Henry Flagler's railroad, Miami's international airport, Cuban exiles, retirement communities, television shows, music videos, and a mythology that proved impossible to compete with. The land did not choose this outcome. History chose it, perception chose it, and now momentum has made it nearly irreversible. One Florida found sunshine, glamour, global connections, and explosive growth. It became a home for millions. The other remained what it has always been, one of the largest, quietest, most underrated regions in the American South, waiting for a moment that may never come.